Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about hollowing. I'm going to go over the different orientations of the wood, different tools that you can use, some gauges and everything that you can either make or buy, and then I'm going to go and do a project, right, and show you exactly how I hollow a small hollow form from beginning to end. When I think of a hollow form, I think of something like this, right? It's just got a hole in the top, and this has been all hollowed out, and it's just like a jar shape, right? So, but hollow forms come in all different shapes, all different sizes, and I'll have a few here going on with a little bit of a slideshow to show you some of the different possibilities, at least pieces that I've done. Okay, so you know, some of them can have like a live edge. Sometimes the live edge is on the top, sometimes the live edge is on the side. The live edge on the side is really kind of unique because it just kind of lets you look inside that hollow form. I think that's kind of cool. And sometimes I'll wind up putting holes in the piece specifically so you can see inside. It just gives it a different look. And this set of hollow forms is a little bit unusual because they're actually hollowed from the bottom. Okay, so we're not going to really talk too much about that now, but it's just another possibility. When you're making your hollow form, you're going to have to decide which way you want to orient the wood on the lathe before you start to shape the outside. So this piece here, you can see the grain runs this way. So we call this an end grain piece, right? Because this is going to get mounted on the lathe like this. Okay, so it's very much like turning the outside would be a lot like doing some spindle work. All right. So when we're doing that, spindle tools totally fine for doing the outside work on this piece. Okay. Now in contrast, I have this piece over here. Okay, and you can see the bark here, and you see the curvature here, right? So we know the grain's running this way. Okay. So this would be side grain or face grain, and this would be mounted on the lathe like this. Okay, more like a bowl. Okay, so when turning the outside of this, you probably don't want to use that spindle roughing gouge. A bowl gouge would be the most appropriate tool to shape the outside for this type of piece here. Okay, but either way is totally acceptable, and it just changes the way the piece looks. So here's a couple pieces that I turned, and you can definitely see the grain patterns are different between the end grain pieces and the side grain pieces. It just gives everything a totally different look. And if you have a piece like this one where you have some heartwood and sapwood contrast, it really kind of gives a nice look to the piece. So, or at least I think so. My first set of hollowing tools were Carbide. These easy wood tools, this is the medium size hollowing tool. It has a maximum depth recommendation here on the side, so you don't go too far in, and it lays flat on the tool rest, and it's got a little carbide cutter. Okay, and I really should have taken them off the rack, right? So you can see here's a hook tool, right? And there's another one with not so severe of a hook, and I'm just going to leave that over there on the tool rack. So you get the idea, okay? So, I mean, these tools were great for doing small things. Didn't really have to sharpen them at all. You know, just rotate the cutter when it starts getting a little bit dull. And, you know, you can toss the cutter, put a new one on, or you can sharpen the cutter with a diamond stone if you want to. And I did that quite a bit, actually. Just to save some money. But yeah, this is my first set of hollowing tools. And that's what I was using for a while, and just making small hollow forms, just, you know, using these tools. So what really got me focused on doing hollow forms, a couple years ago, I went to the Mid-Atlantic Symposium, and I actually got to pick John Jordan up from the airport in Philly and drive him out to Lancaster, and we had a long discussion for the ride out there, and he convinced me that that I would be better off using some high-speed steel tools, and that's what I'm primarily using now for everything. I think they're a little bit more forgiving. They're really easy to sharpen and to keep sharp. And these tools made by John Jordan, well, the handle's not. The handle's a Thompson's handle. But John makes these tools, and this is the small set, okay? There's a larger set that I use when I use my jig, and but these are great. So, you know, that's nibble out the wood a little bit at a time, and just like the Carbide tools, these act as a scraper. Okay, it's got a little high-speed steel cutter on there, and you just sharpen it up on the grinder, and it works really well. This is the larger size tool. Just the bar is just heavier, you know. So it's, and the difference really being between the two is, you know, you get too deep with this, and you'll know that this will start to flex, and you get some chatter, right? And, you know, you could go substantially deeper with this. You can see there's a huge difference in the thickness of the tool here, right? But the same cutter, all right? And these are kind of cool. It has a little set screw in the back. I don't know if you can see that, if it's focusing on me or the set screw, I don't know. But there's a little set screw, and you just take that set screw out, and the little cutter just pops right off. And John sells a... sells a little holder that you can use with the Wolverine system to sharpen these cutters. When you're hollowing your pieces out, you're going to want to make sure that the wall thickness on these pieces is going to be uniform, and, you know, a uniform thickness throughout the piece. So on the small hollow forms, you know, the real small ones, you know, my caliper is my fingers, right? So you can just reach inside and you can feel. This one's obviously too big. I can only reach into about here, right? And then that's as far as I can go. So to reach inside there, you can get a tool, or you can make a tool that's just basically a gauge to give you an idea of what the wall thickness is. Okay, so this will not reach all the way inside here, but I'll show you how. This is a Sorby tool, okay, and it's just a small hollow form gauge, I think is what the name of it was, right? So you just kind of put it inside, and you can see there's a gap, right? And when you put it inside, you can kind of like take this end, you know, just the tip, right? Or here, maybe I should point at it this way. Just this tip, okay? And you run that along the inner wall, okay? And then you can just look at where, you know, the top part is, all right? And you can see that the wall thickness is fairly uniform, all right? Because the gap remains about the same, okay? Now on the back side here, you can use this to measure what that gap is, but I don't really want that to run and rub across the top, so there's always going to be a bit of a gap, right? So I'm just trying to make sure that that wall thickness is fairly uniform, okay? All right, let's say you don't want to buy a tool. I mean, you know, who wants to buy stuff if you don't have to, okay? This is just a piece of wire, right? So maybe some heavy wire, you know, something I picked up at the Lowe's, all right? But basically the same thing. I'm going to have this flat arm, and, you know, this end of it here, let me put this down. This end of it here is going to run along the interior wall of the hollow form, and then you just have to bend that wire a little bit just to set a gap so you can get it into the hollow form. And then you can measure the gap and know what that is, and then when you put that in the hollow form, you can just kind of run that through, okay? And you rub that curved end along the inner wall, and you can just judge by the gap to make sure that it's uniform, right? I don't really want that, like I said, I don't want it rubbing, right? But I got about 1/4 of an inch gap between the outside and the tip of the curved wire, right? So if I measured this, that's about 1/2 an inch. So that'd tell me that the, you know, the thickness of the wall on this piece is about 1/4 of an inch throughout the piece, okay? So I think that's pretty self-explanatory there, right? I got another one. This is just for smaller pieces. It's not much different in size, and you can make these as big or as small as you want. But I only use these for the small hollow forms that I do. The larger ones, I just use a jig. I just think the laser on the jig is easier. It is almost 100% success rate. You know, you don't have to worry about blowing through the side of the piece. Yeah, I guess that's it when it comes to, oh no, here, well, I'll show you this kind of how this works. I got a piece around here. All right, sorry about that. I had a hard time finding my little cutaway piece here, right? So I turned this hollow form and it had a crack in it, so I wound up just cutting it in half, and I'm using it now for the demo, right? But you can see kind of here what I'm doing, right? I'm gonna put the tool, okay, the gauge, inside and just run it along the interior wall, okay? And as I'm running it along the interior wall, you can see the tip of the curved part basically stays a uniform distance away from the outer wall, right? So that way you can judge and make sure that the wall thickness is even, and you can see that, you know, you can see inside this, right? So you can see that the wall thickness is even. So, but that's kind of what you're going for, all right? All right, so those are the main tools that you're going to need to do hollowing. A couple other things that's going to be extremely convenient. One's the air compressor, okay? So as you hollow the piece out, the inside of it is obviously going to get filled up with a bunch of shavings and chips. So you're going to want to use the air compressor just to, you know, you put the nozzle, that air compressor, in the hole that you're hollowing through, and you just blow all those chips right out of there. I mean, sometimes if you're doing a face grain or side grain type hollowing, it creates a lot of like ribbon-like shavings. When you're doing end grain, it's going to be mostly just dust, okay? But the side grain or the face grain turnings that you do, it's going to create a lot of ribbon-like shavings, and you might need to get like another piece of wire that's got a hook on the end and actually pull that stuff out of the hole. It really depends on how big the hole is that you're hollowing through, but it might be something that you might need to do, okay? But yeah, that's about it. So you need a compressor, and one more thing that you might really want to get is just a small flashlight. All right, I have this one. It's just, you know, it's a rechargeable little flashlight, but it's great for looking inside the hollow form, you know, looking to make sure that the wall thicknesses are even, uniform, you're hollowed all the way down to the bottom. Yeah, so little flashlight really comes in handy. Okay. So now that we got that background info and everything out of the way, it's time to actually turn a hollow form. And for this project, I'm going to use this piece of cherry. It's about maybe 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 by 5 inches tall. I've already marked the center using a center finder, and I put a little spring-loaded center punch mark on both sides. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to decide which one of these sides is going to be the bottom, and then mount this between centers. And I think I'm going to make this side the bottom because this got a little bit of sapwood running into it here, and this sapwood is a little bit punky, okay? So I'm going to want most of that just to go away. And when I'm turning this piece, it's, you know, going to be narrower at the bottom, and it's going to have a little bit of a flare to the top. As a matter of fact, it's going to kind of be shaped a whole lot like that, okay? At least that's what I'm going to be going for, all right? Here you can see I'm using a one-way safety center. There's no teeth on this. It's just friction is going to be the only thing driving the wood. That way, if you get a catch, the wood just slips. It's just a lot safer. Yeah, and then the life center, very similar setup. All right, so I decided this is going to be the bottom. So I'm going to put the bottom over by the tailstock end, and that's just my practice. Lock down that tailstock. All right, and that's because I'm going to put a tenon here, okay? And I always cut my tenons on the tailstock end. That's just habit that I've been doing for a long time. Okay, I got my face shield on, and you can see I got this tool rest set up, so, you know, I'm clearing the piece. And so now it's time to turn that lathe on, and I'm going to use a spindle roughing gouge. This is an end grain orientation, so shouldn't have any problems with that. All right, I'm going to move this tool rest in a bit and then finish just rounding this up. Okay, you can see here I moved the tool rest so I can face off this side here and form my tenon. Yeah, and I'm going to do that with a just a spindle gouge. You can see here I made a tenon. I also have a little shoulder or a step here. So I'm going to cut a dovetail in that tenon, and at the same time I'm going to flatten up this step so the jaws of the chuck have a nice flat surface for this piece of wood to rest on. Okay. All right, so to do that I'm going to have to reposition this rest a little bit, and I'm going to use a skew. It's just a small skew. You can see a little bit dusty there. You can see here, I mean, that because I wiped that dust away, you can see it's catching some of the dust in that burr. And, you know, I have this at a 15 and a 15, so it's a 30-degree grind. And I use a burnishing rod to curl that burr over, and I primarily use this skew just for this, to make this dovetail for my tenons. And you can see that pretty much made really quick work of that. And so what I have now, I have a slight dovetail on the tenon. And I also have this, you really want it to be flat or slightly deeper on the inside, because you want the outer rim of this step to be sitting on the jaws as far apart as possible, or on the widest part of those jaws. You definitely don't want this end here to be lower than what's in the center, because that'll create a condition where this blank will wobble while you're hollowing it out. Okay, so now it's time to take the blank. I'm going to put it in the chuck, all right? And I'm going to take my key and just tighten this just slightly so it doesn't fall out, okay? And I'm going to move the tailstock in, all right? And I'm going to lock that down. And I'm going to tighten up the tailstock to put pressure on that step that we had and push that step right up against the jaws. Okay, here's a close-up. You can see where that step lands on top of those jaws, and you can see that there's no gaps at all between the top of the jaws and where that step is, or that shoulder. Okay, so once we know we have that pushed up against there as far as it's going to go and as tight as it's going to get, now it's time to tighten up the chuck. Okay, I'm going to tighten up the jaws, and I'm going to tighten this pretty much as tight as I can get it. I'm not going to kill myself, but then you can see I spun that around and used the other side and just tighten that up just a little bit more, and I'll go back to the first one, and I got a little bit more out of it, and that's generally good enough. So now the piece is on the lathe, okay, and it's time to give it some shape. Okay, I put a fresh edge on my spindle gouge, and now it's time to give this piece some shape. Okay, so there we have a nice little shape. We got a little bead around the top, and this piece is now ready for some hollowing. Oh, let me get this mask off just for a sec. Okay, to start out the hollowing, we're going to measure the piece and determine about how deep we're going to have to drill a hole, and that's going to become the depth stop for the piece. Okay, so you can just use a drill. This is just a 1/4 inch drill, and I got a handle I put on. It's epoxied in, right? You can see I use a piece of tape here as a depth gauge, and you can use that, and that'll work great. And I used to do this all the time, and still do on some pieces. But for the most part now, what I have been doing is I've been using a Forstner bit to do the initial depth. Okay, here you can see I have my Forstner bit on here, and then I have an extension, and it's in my drill chuck, and I need to drill a hole that's going to be to the proper depth for this piece. Now to do that, I'm going to have to measure that with a ruler. Okay, so I'm just going to grab a ruler out of my tool chest here. All right, and I'm going to measure this, and it is just shy of 4 inches. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark a spot on here that's about just shy of 4 inches, and I say it's just shy of 4 inches. I'm measuring to this gap that I have here, or this, you know, the transition between the waist part and the actual piece, because I'm going to extend my piece into this waist area when I turn the tenon off. Okay, so I can really kind of get close to that. So it's just a little bit shy of 4 inches. So I got to find a way to mark that. And what I do is I just use the Sharpie. Okay, so I kind of put this right here. And let's uncap that Sharpie. And I put the point of the Forstner bit right at 0. And I'll come up here and I'll make a mark with a Sharpie. Okay, now there's a whole bunch of marks on here, but only one of them's fresh. Okay, so that's the one I'm going to drill to. All right, so let's just put this stuff away. Turn the lathe speed down to something that's appropriate for drilling. All right, so we're talking maybe about 400, 500 RPMs, right? And let's just drill this out. You can see as I was drilling in here, I was just using the crank handle on the tailstock, and I was going in maybe about like 6 or 7 cranks. And for my quill, I know that's going to only take me in so far. If I go in much further than that, it starts to bind. Okay, so what we have right now, I mean, this is just basically a similar piece that I turned, okay, and then I wound up just cutting it in half. But you can kind of see what we have right now. Something similar to this, right? So I have the shape, and then you can see where I drilled that Forstner bit in, and you can see that's hollowed some of that out, but that's given me some room to use my hollowing tools, okay? So I can then continue to hollow this piece out. Here you can see I'm ready to start hollowing this out. I got my tool rest set at the appropriate height. What I wanted to do is I want this tool to pretty much be on the center line. And since it's a, you know, like I said, it's working like a scraper, right? I'm going to want to have the tool handle up just a little bit higher than the tip. And that's really comfortable for me. That puts the tool underneath my forearm, and I'll show you the angle in just a second, right? But what's important, since I'm using this hook tool, right, I got to make sure that I start cutting this piece with the hook tool resting past the bend, okay? So this is about where I'm going to start, and then from here I can go in. Okay, as long as the tool's resting on this straight shaft area, I won't get a lot of torque. But if I put it out like this and move this closer, and that would push down on that, and that would have a tendency to roll that tool over, and then I would get a catch. So I'm going to position this so when I start cutting, I'm cutting resting the tool on the tool rest on the straight part of the shaft and not on the bend. So depending on your lathe, you might want to take the tailstock completely off the lathe to do this hollowing. Mine swings out of the way, so it's laid out of the way. You know, depending on the size of your lathe, if you can get the tailstock far enough away, you can just slide it all the way down to the end of the lathe. But you're going to be over the bed a lot doing this hollowing that I'm showing you here, okay? So I put the camera back far, and I know I'm cutting my head off a little bit. But I want you to see how I have this tool and how I'm holding it, all right? You can see I have the tool underneath of my forearm, okay? And I'm gonna lean over the tool, so it's basically pushing up on my shoulder, all right? And then when the tip of the tool goes in here, I'm just gonna rock my body back and forth, and I'm gonna move the tool using this hand, okay, and just squeezing it to do the cutting, all right? So that's going to be the motion that I'm going to be doing. All right, I'm going to do a little bit of the hollowing from here so you can kind of see what I'm doing, but you know, obviously this part's going to be boring. There's really not much I can do. You can't see inside the piece, so I'm just going to hollow this out, and we'll come back when I'm done. You can see as I'm hollowing this out, there's going to be certain points where there's too much shavings in here and I really can't do any more work, so I'm going to use my air compressor and just blow all the dust out of the piece. Okay, so I changed the camera angle so you can kind of see what I'm doing here on a closer scale, right? So what I'm doing is I'm just going in and I'm just making very small cuts, you know, really just the width of this cutter, just going in maybe 1 millimeter, 2-3 millimeters at a time, and just going in, and then smoothing that all out, you know, doing like 5 or 6, 7 different passes, and then smoothing it out, and then reaching in, finding where the step is. Now if I go in, I can find that. It's like, right, you can see that fall off, right? See right there, there's a step inside. All right, and actually, since I'm that deep in the piece, I could probably move this a little closer. So hopefully you were noticing that as well, okay? I had the camera angle back further so you could see how I was leaning into the piece and using my arm to support the handle on the tool. But now I want you to see how I'm actually using my hand to squeeze the tool to make the cuts, okay, as I'm swinging my arm, all right? Okay, you could see there I was using my hand, and it's very subtle, okay? It's more of a feel thing, but it's very subtle. I'm squeezing the tool and just using that cutter head to just take some of that wood away, and just a little bit at a time, all right? And then you could see that I was smoothing it out, right, just along the inside, and you can feel all the bumps and ridges in there when it's uneven. And when you're smoothing it out, you're really putting almost no pressure at all against the inside wall. You're just basically letting the tool ride on that inside wall, okay, and you're just kind of smoothing that interior surface out. So let me blow the dust out of the inside of that, and I'm going to take a quick look in here with a flashlight. All right, I got most of it done. All right, just a little bit more I could probably do. So let's get that done, and then we'll come back. All right, let me move that tool rest out of the way. So I have this hollowed out, and you know, I can tell just by feeling in here, it's about maybe 1/2 of an inch thick, and I can only feel probably down to about here, right, this area here. So, and after that, it just gets, it's too deep. So I'm going to use my gauge, and we're going to open that up just a bit. All right, and then we'll see that this is going to be just about 1/2 of an inch, you know, throughout the piece, right? I'm going to do this. Hopefully you can see it. I'm getting the right angle for you, right? It's a little bit thicker down at the bottom, but you can see here the even wall thickness, and it's just about that thick, right? So it's about 1/2 an inch. All right. So with that about 1/2 an inch, okay, the next step is to take this down to about 1/4 of an inch. Okay, I left it about 1/2 of an inch because it just leaves a lot of mass in the piece, okay, and it just keeps everything very stabilized, right? And nothing's very flimsy, and if you do get a catch, it's usually a little bit more forgiving. Once the piece gets really thin, the thing could just shatter. All right, so right now, okay, so we're going to go back to, I made up a bunch of these models just for the demo here, right? So right now we're about like this. Okay, so we have about 1/2 inch wall thickness throughout the piece. Okay, we're hollowed down pretty much to the bottom. All right, and the next step is to just take this away so it's about 1/4 of an inch. Okay, before I get into hollowing out the rest of this piece, I kind of forgot about this. One of the reasons I use this Forstner bit is because it eliminates one of the hollowing steps, right? Not only did I take out this much wood with the Forstner bit, but if I drill just a narrow 1/4 inch hole to the depth, I would have then used the straight bit or the straight tool for hollowing to basically do the same thing that I did right here, right? I would just widen up that 1/4 inch hole until I had enough room so I could start using the hook tool, okay? So once I got the hook tool in there, I can really take all this wood away. The straight tool can come in handy down near the bottom. It just comes at, you know, it's really all about the angle, right? So with the right angle, as long as you can reach the inside of the piece, you're fine. But you can see here's the straight tool, and because of the opening, I can't reach into this upper shoulder, right? It's just never going to happen, right? So, but with the straight tool, you can see I should be able to reach, you know, from about maybe 2/3 of the way and down. Okay, you can see with this gauge here, right? I'm just about this wide. Now I got a little bit of a gap here because I don't want the tip of that rubbing on the outside, right? So if I push that up against there, you can see that's riding up against the inside wall. And you can see I think about here, I'm good, and then here it starts to get a little bit thicker, and then you can see here it's just too thick. So got a little bit more hollowing to do. Okay, my compressor kicked on, so I thought that was a good opportunity to change the angle. So hopefully this will be a little bit easier for you to see, right? So I get the tool in here, and you can see there's this little gap, right? A little gap between that piece, you know, the outside wall and the wire, right? See that little gap, right? So I'm trying to get it so it's right on the edge. So you can see, there you go, that's probably better, right? So you can see as I'm riding it through here, right? As I get closer to the bottom, all right, down here, it's still too thick, okay? But the rest of it is very even throughout the piece, okay? Let's go back to my little samples, okay? So this is kind of like what we're looking at right now. Although, I mean, I have the piece I'm working on right now is hollowed down to about here. All right. But just so you can kind of, let me zoom this out just a little bit. All right. Just so you can kind of see what's going on. Man, I'm going to have to do this so you can see it, not me, right? This is kind of like what we're looking at, right? Now this wall thickness is just a little bit too thin. This is about 1/8 of an inch, right? So, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about here, right? We're just riding this little end here, this bent section along the inside wall, and then just using that outside piece to gauge where it gets too thick, right? So obviously here too thick, there's a step inside here. That would have been where I was using the hook tool, right? Or using the hollowing tool to, you know, narrow that or reduce that wall thickness. Okay, so I just got a little bit more hollowing in this piece to do, maybe about like the last inch or so. And to do that, I'm actually going to use the straight tool. So I'm going to have to swap out the tools. So here's the straight tool. I don't have to worry about that bend, so I can have this tool rest right up against the, you know, pretty much almost right up against the mouth of that hollow form. And I'm going to put that in here, and I'm going to try to find where that step is. All right. All right, it's right in here is where that step is, and it's just very gradual. So I'm going to turn the lathe on, and I'm going to use my finger as kind of like a gauge where I got to be. So right about there. And then I'm just going to really, really carefully feel for that wall. All right, I'm on the wall now, so I can start taking away some material. Okay, I don't know if you can tell or not from the way this video is set up, but I'm to get the angle to hit this back corner, I'm really having to lean over the lathe pretty substantially, okay? So I would say I'm leaning over the bed of the lathe, and that's not a problem, but you can see that if I had to do this inside wall up in this area, that I would literally have to be on the other side of the lathe to do that if I wasn't using that hook tool. But this is done. All right, this is done. I'm going to blow the dust out real quick. I'm going to take a look inside. All right, looking inside here, you can see, you know, where that Forstner bit left that little ring that it leaves, you know, as it's cutting through. Okay, so I took some time off camera to sand this up to about 320. I also burned in a little line around the rim just to give it some definition. And now it's time to take all this waste and remove the tenon, right? Take this waste off and remove the tenon. What I did was I just used a piece of maple in here, some scrap, and I put like a little tenon on here. Basically that's going to be a plug that's going to be the same size as the opening here, so that'll fit on there. And then you can use the same point from before and just line that up with the live center, okay, and just use that as a friction fit. All right, and then just turn that away, okay. For a piece this size, I wouldn't worry about this, would be fine. For some of the larger pieces, I use something a little bit different. And it's going to be a jig that I made specifically for removing the tenons from pieces. Here you can see I have this jig now up on the lathe, and it's just a face plate and then a piece of wood. I got a hole drilled in it, and into that hole I have a threaded rod. Right, you could use solid, you could use threaded, it wouldn't make any difference. Right here I have a stop collar with a set screw in it so I can adjust. All right, and there's a sliding wedge on here as well, okay, and then the end I capped it off with a piece of wood and a little felt pad. Okay, just a slight adjustment, so, but it's kind of important to see what I'm doing here, right? And the same thing as before, right? I'm going to use the center mark from the live center and just line that up again. But instead of this piece resting on the rim, how it would have been using the other piece of wood, right? Now this piece is going to rest on the bottom inside, so it's really going to just get pinched right here. Okay, if that makes sense, right? So you slip this on, and now this piece of wood is resting on the inside bottom, okay? And then we're going to take this live center, bring that up, all right? Lock that tailstock in place, okay? And just tighten that up just a hair, and then you can see now I'm going to use this wedge, and that wedge is going to keep this piece running true, all right? And then the stop collar, that just holds the wedge in place. So I'm going to tighten that up. All right. And if I did this right, I'm going to tighten up the tailstock just a little bit to hold everything in place. And if I did this right and I switched the lathe on, everything should run fairly true. Right? That's pretty good, right? Okay, so the next step here, and it's going to be the last step before the final sanding, okay, would be to just to remove this waste area and the tenon, all right? And to do that, I'm going to use a spindle gouge. Okay, so here you can see I have the piece here ready to go, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to start removing this wood, and when I get close, I'm going to follow this line, okay, and just extend the piece a little bit into here, and then we're going to create a bottom, make it a little bit concave, and I'm going to take it off the lathe. Okay, hopefully you can see how I extended that just a little bit. Here's going to be the bottom of my piece, is right about where the tip of the gouge is. And now I'm going to start cutting this in. And hopefully I didn't drill it too deep and I won't separate this off the piece and wind up with a big funnel. Okay, sanded it up a little bit. I could have done a better job sanding that and blending that in a little bit better. I mean, there's still some areas here that probably could use some sanding, but just for the demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this off with a handsaw, and then I'll show you how I deal with that little nub end that's on there. Okay, the last step here is to take this little nub off, and to do that I'm going to use a hook knife. You can just sand that off if you wanted to, and that'd work just as well, you know. But I have this hook knife. I do some spoon carving now and then, so just going to sit here and whittle away at this little nub. And you see, this isn't going to take long at all. And just kind of squeezing my hands, so I'm just doing this kind of motion. All right, I don't want to wind up cutting myself. All right, just get down. I'm just kind of scraping that along the bottom. And just going to hit it from the other side because there's just a little bit of a step there. Okay, now that's all gone, right? So the bottom's all nice and flat. I could take some sandpaper now and just sand that down, but there you go. Nice little hollow form. All right. I got my face shield hair going for me now, but there you go. Got a little hollow form made out of some cherry. Almost dropped it, but here, put that up closer. Hopefully that's tracking in a little bit closer, right? It's all hollowed on the inside. The bottom all shaped up. Needs to be sanded, I know, right? About a 1/4 inch wall thickness. And I hope you found this this video helpful. And just remember, when you're going through these steps, right, I'm reaching over here, and we're going to start out hollowing just by drilling a hole, okay? So now if you use a Forstner bit, you're going to save yourself the step, but if you just use a drill bit, right, you're going to have to open up that hole big enough so you can get a hook tool in here, all right? So that's kind of step one and maybe step two. And once you have that, that cylinder basically hollowed out, you can kind of start to hollow out the inside, kind of like an egg, all right? You want to have, you know, leave about a 1/2 inch, you know, maybe a little bit more, but you want to take the bulk of the material out of the inside, okay? And after you remove the bulk of this material, we can go back for the last step. Now this is not completed all the way, but you get the idea. You do the last step and you can start thinning out the walls, and then use your gauge, okay, to make sure that the wall thicknesses are even. And I have a piece that I had that was that box elder. Sorry. Sorry about that. So, but see, I got this box elder piece so we can see, right? So here's what we're going for, right? We're going for about a 1/4 inch wall thickness all the way around the whole piece. All right? Now what you don't want to do is just wing it, right? Well, I guess you could, right? And I did, all right? And just winging it, you wind up with some pretty uneven wall thickness, all right? At least for me, it wound up with some pretty uneven wall thickness, and here it gets really, really thin, right? Really, really thin. And how thin? Just give me one sec. Where's that flashlight? Right? So how thin, you can kind of see right through it, right? So that's how thin that is there. Any more and it would have just broke apart, all right? So using those gauges are a good way to just ensure that you have an even wall thickness throughout the piece. Okay? So that's it. That's the presentation for today. And I hope you liked the video. If you have any questions, I'm not here to answer questions. So I'm away on vacation. So I'm sure Tom or Joe or one of the other guys will be able to answer some questions you have on hollowing. But that's how I do it. And thanks for watching.